Thanks, Mike. Colonel Zuluaga, my dear family, and distinguished guests. One of my professors in graduate school told us that one should always speak in threes, and over the years I've observed he was right. So I'll speak of three things this morning. I'll look to the past, I'll look inward, and I'll look to the future. Begin with the past. We are here this morning upon the deck of the mighty USS Massachusetts. This ship has special meaning for my family, many of whom are here today. My grandfather, Commander Ralph H.D. Orsay, served aboard her as a medical officer, crossing the Pacific in 1944 and 45 as part of Admiral Halsey's Third Fleet. When my brother and I were young, Grandpa brought us here and gave us his own personal tour. I remember holding his hand as we walked through sick bay, listening as he told us what it was like to work there. His widow, my grandmother Clara D. Orsay, celebrated her 107th birthday this past summer at her home in Needham, Massachusetts, about an hour's drive north of us today. She's in amazing health, and she enjoys visiting with her children, her grandchildren, and her great-grandchildren, but she wasn't up to the strain of coming aboard the ship today. Their sons are sailors as well. My Uncle Ralph served in the Navy himself. My Uncle Paul, here today, is saltier than any sailor I've ever known. He skippered wooden schooners and tall ships across the oceans of the world. My mother, their daughter Helen Grace, passed away 10 years ago this month, and I still miss her every day. When I was deployed to Afghanistan in 2012, flying in helicopters to meet with Afghan leaders and returning to my room at night to video chat live with my boys 7,000 miles away, my Uncle Paul sent me an email. He attached a scan of a letter my grandfather wrote to my grandmother in February 1945 while he served aboard this ship. The 7-page, single-space type letter covered a span of 7 months and was reviewed by the censors before he could send it. There was no FaceTime in 1945. I'd like to share a few lines from that letter with you today. Dear Clara, as you remember, we left the States on 14 July 1944. On the 21st of July, we arrived at Pearl Harbor. The voyage was very pleasant, and we all enjoyed it. On the 1st of August 1944, we left the islands and sailed to the Niwatoq. On entering the atoll, we saw what terrible havoc naval gunfire can do. Just stumps of trees and gaping holes was all that was left in the defended areas. Suddenly, on September 16, we made a swooping raid on Mindanao. This time I was scared, for a Zeke Japanese plane plunked a bomb which was a dud and came dashing past our stern, hell-bent for leather, and the 2 fantail anti-aircraft guns opened up just as I stepped out of the wardroom. The streaks of fire and bullets were arcing toward his tail, but he was going so fast, and me being green, I thought he was flying toward us and ducked back inside. In the meantime, he expired and made a beautiful splash in the water, our first kill. You're sitting on the fantail. The guns he described are the ones you see behind me on either side. 25 years ago, I called a Navy recruiter and asked how I could apply for a commission as a Navy Reserve intelligence officer. I filled out reams of paperwork and eventually was told to prepare to meet with a board of senior Navy captains who would assess whether they thought I was fit to join the program. I went to the interview well prepared, ready to answer the questions I was told they would ask. What do you think you can contribute to the program? What skills do you have that are relevant to the Navy's needs? And why do you want to join the Navy? I put some thought into that last one. All of the service members you see before you have answered that question, each of us in our own way. My answer was a combination of a desire to serve, a deep interest in defense and national security, and the inspiring example of my grandfather, who as a near 40-year-old family practitioner with a wife and 2 young children, volunteered to leave all that he loved behind to serve until the war was over, until imperialism was defeated, until his family and country were safe again. The board nodded their approval. I had earned my commission. Now we'll look within. In September 2001, I was nearing 40, living just north of here in Massachusetts with a family that included 2 young boys. I'd done my monthly drills and my annual training, but on that crisp autumn day, I was now forced to contemplate the true meaning and the sacrifice of service. My first call came in the fall of 2002, and I left my boys behind to spend a year in Washington, D.C. Grandpa's war lasted about 3.5 years. Ours has lasted a lot longer than that. 10 years after my first mobilization, I was called to active duty again. This time I went to Afghanistan for a 10-month deployment. My boys were older now. They understood more, they knew why I had to go, and they knew how long I would be gone. But they still felt the frustrations of all children whose parents aren't there when they need them. and in the valleys of the Hindu Kush, I felt the longing of all parents whose children are far away. Grandpa continues. On the 26th of September, we put into Saipan. I was itching to get ashore, so officers put on their sidearms, and I took a Red Cross haversack and went ashore with the exec. Anywhere you looked, shell fire had ripped up everything. We stopped by the now famous sugar mill, I mean what was left of it. Soon we came to the executive or plant manager's home and lesser homes. I saw a child's Japanese wooden clog lying out on a lawn, and I couldn't help wondering what had happened and if he had lost it while running away. And I figured he was the size of Ralphie, my Uncle Ralph, now a grandfather himself. Then I saw a broken doll and thought of Helen Grace, my mother. Almost all of the reservists you see before you have been mobilized in the years since 9/11. Most have deployed to Iraq, Afghanistan, or Guantanamo. Several have deployed more than once. Some are preparing to mobilize and deploy yet again. The demands of our military for talented and trained intelligence specialists will not diminish in the foreseeable future. Our families have shared in the sacrifices demanded of those who served in time of war. And we've depended on our families to support us and to carry on in our absence as a price of our service. My father Steve is here today. My earliest memories include conversations with him about integrity, about honesty, about issues of national and international importance that were bigger than ourselves. He spent 2 years as an Army doctor in Korea and Natick Labs, with stories of bureaucratic comedy and incompetence that rival those of MASH. I think my choice to spend decades in the Navy has often surprised him, but he's always been there to support me, to challenge me, and to encourage me. When I mobilized, he stepped in often to care for my children as only a grandfather can, bringing me tremendous peace of mind and allowing me to focus on my mission and the sailors I'd taken into harm's way. Several years ago, Dad met the woman who became my stepmother, Liz. I've loved getting to know her and her extended family, and have been delighted to see her and my father enjoying their retirement together. They've seen more of the world in the last few years than I've seen in my life, and that includes the dozens of obscure places the Navy has sent me. Liz, you are gracious, loving, and kind, and I'm grateful that my sons and I have you in our lives. And now I'll look to the future. My boys, Jackson and Bennett, are on the verge of manhood, and I've been in the Navy their whole lives. Because I've spent my Navy career as a reservist, most of my service has been out of their sight. I go away for drill weekends and annual training. I go far away from mobilization. They haven't experienced the daily rhythm of an active duty military family, with mom or dad coming home every day in uniform, talking about the next deployment, about the move that will come with the next permanent change of station. But out of sight is not necessarily out of mind. The prospect of mobilization and deployment looms always over reservists and their families. In some ways, it's less predictable for us than our active duty counterparts. The transitions are more abrupt, more jarring, and leave our families with less community support than they would have living on or near a large base. Jackson, Bennett, I'm proud of the way you've handled the strain that comes with being part of the Navy family. You supported your mom and each other, you focused on your studies, and as you've grown older, you've asked me mature and sophisticated questions about the nature of service, the responsibilities that come with my job, the sense of mission and purpose that keeps me serving. You make me proud to be your father every day, and coming home to you has always been the best part of every trip the Navy's ever sent me. Melissa, my partner, my love, thank you for being with me in this life. You bring me joy, solace, inspiration, and understanding. I am my best self when I am with you, and nothing brings me more happiness than the promise of our long life together. Your parents, Liz and Phil, thank you for welcoming into your loving family. Thank you for making the long trip to be with us today. The tide has turned on the long familiar pattern of mobilization and deployment to war in landlocked desert realms. Although most of these sailors, assigned to United States Central Command, focus on the war-torn Middle East, they continue to research, analyze, and report on Islamic extremism and threats to our forces in the Arabian Peninsula. Much of the military has begun to reorient itself, to return to a pre-war rhythm, where the Navy keeps watch on the maritime domain, where naval intelligence focuses its attention on emerging naval powers like China, where the prospect of war is more remote, but the consequences against nuclear-armed foes are potentially more catastrophic. And yet we've had no VJ Day. Our enemy hasn't surrendered. Al-Qaeda and the Taliban are now overshadowed by the Islamic State. As intelligence professionals, we can explain how their goals differ, where their support networks overlap, what the rivalries are between their leaders. What they share, however, is an antipathy toward the United States and our allies, a desire to use violence to achieve their goals, access to money, recruits, and weapons. More than a decade after 9/11, we still struggle to anticipate the next target, to understand why nihilist fundamentalist ideology appeals to disaffected people in oil-rich societies, and alarmingly in the high schools of Western Europe and North America. The war is not yet over. Extremism is not yet defeated. Our families and countries are not yet safe. We still have work to do. You, the sailors and soldiers here today, are doing that work and doing it well. I'm inspired by your professionalism, your dedication, your skill, and the quality of your analysis and your production. Our active duty counterparts routinely compliment me on the value and impact of the support we provide, and I have the privilege and honor of telling them that my shipmates are outstanding professionals. Thank you for letting me bask in the praise you have earned. I have a few more years left in me. The Navy will eventually tell me it's time for me to retire. But until then, my job is to make it possible for the next generation of intelligence professionals to do their jobs. Make sure they're trained, make sure they're ready to mobilize, make sure their mission and tasking is relevant and aligns with the skills they bring to bear. And so we continue to serve. As Grandpa concluded his letter in 1945, to date, I have traveled about 70,000 miles, so you can see the moss and barnacles don't get much chance to grow on the bottom of this ship. I am still too healthy and too fat. To my sailors, to my family, and to my esteemed joint service comrades in arms, thank you for joining me on my journey of service. May we continue to sail together, and may we all remain too healthy